He wasn't always like this. In fact, if you saw him just a few years ago, you might have crossed the street to avoid him. Back then, he had a haunted look in his eyes, the kind that comes from chasing highs that only pull you deeper into darkness. His days blurred together in a haze of substances and streetlights, and nights were colder than the concrete he sometimes slept on. To the outside world, he was just another lost cause, another broken man with a shattered future. But what if I told you that same man, the one people had given up on, now stands in front of hundreds, delivering speeches that bring grown men to tears? This is not just a story about addiction. It's about the war between who we are and who we could be. It's about how deep someone can fall, and still find a way back. And most importantly, it's about how pain, when faced head-on, can become power. He didn't grow up with dreams of becoming a junkie. He had parents who loved him, teachers who believed in him, and friends who thought he was the funny one. So how does someone with so much potential lose everything? The answer is both simple and terrifying. One wrong choice. One moment of weakness. One friend offering something, just to take the edge off. That's all it took. What started as a casual escape from stress slowly turned into a daily habit, then a dependency, and finally, an identity. Soon, he wasn't the funny one anymore. He was the unreliable one. The thief. The liar. The one who'd sell anything, steal anything, say anything, just to feed the monster he had let in. People stopped answering his calls. His family gave him ultimatums. He tried rehab, twice. Failed both times. He even tried running away from it all, moving to a different city, thinking maybe a fresh start would fix a shattered soul. But as he would later say, "You can't outrun what's inside your head." And then came the night everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. No bright lights. No intervention circle with tearful family members. Just him, sitting alone on a bench at 2 a.m., high, shaking, and for the first time, genuinely scared he wouldn't make it to morning. His hands trembled, not just from withdrawal, but from a deep knowing that this was the end of something. Either his life, or his addiction. What happened next is something he still struggles to explain. Some call it divine intervention. Some say it was his lowest moment turning into his turning point. All he knows is that from that night on, he made a vow. Not to be perfect, but to fight. Every day. Every hour if he had to. And now, when he stands before a crowd, sharing his story, people listen. Because they know it's real. Raw. And painfully honest. But what pulled him out of that darkness? Who helped him take that first step? And what's the one moment he says still haunts him to this day? That is where this story truly begins. He never thought it would come to this. Not really. Not when he was just a kid riding his bike through quiet suburban streets, waving to neighbors, and coming home to the smell of his mother's cooking. Back then, life felt safe. Predictable. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to be a writer, or maybe a teacher. Someone who mattered. Someone people looked up to. But somewhere between high school and heartbreak, things began to slip. First, it was the pressure. Pressure to be successful, pressure to fit in, pressure to be okay even when he wasn't. That pressure turned into silence. And silence, as he'd learned later, is dangerous. The crowd he fell in with wasn't evil. Just lost like him. A few drinks here, a few pills there. Everyone was doing it. At least that's what they told each other. And when the pills weren't enough to quiet the noise in his head, he found stronger things. Cheaper things. Things that offered relief but took so much more in return. He started missing classes. Then jobs. Then birthdays. He burned bridges he didn't even know he'd need later. And when people tried to help, he pushed them away, convinced that nobody really understood what he was going through. But the truth is, he didn't understand it himself. He just knew that when he used, the weight disappeared for a while. And when he didn't, it felt like the air was too thick to breathe. Days melted into nights, and time became meaningless. He'd wake up in strange places, unsure how he got there. His body felt bruised, but it was his mind that was breaking. And through it all, there was a voice in his head whispering, "This is who you are now. This is your life." Still, something inside him resisted that voice. A small, flickering part of him that remembered who he used to be, who he wanted to be. But every time he reached for that version of himself, it felt further away. Like trying to hold water in his hands. That night on the bench wasn't the first time he thought about giving up entirely. But it was the first time he realized no one was coming to save him. If he wanted out, he'd have to crawl out himself. And even then, he wasn't sure if he'd make it. He remembers staring up at the sky, watching the stars blur through his tears. He whispered something. He doesn't even remember what. A prayer maybe. Or just a final plea. And in that quiet he felt something. Not a voice. Not a miracle. Just stillness. A pause in the chaos. And for some reason, it was enough. Enough to make him stand up. Enough to make him walk. The next morning, he made one call. The person on the other end hadn't heard from him in over a year. She almost didn't answer. But she did. And that one call set off a chain of events that would change everything. But that doesn't mean it got easier. In fact, things got harder. Much harder. There were relapses. There were moments when he screamed into the void, begging for it all to stop. There were nights when he sat on the floor of his bathroom, shaking, sweating, and wondering if he'd made a mistake trying to change. But every time he wanted to quit, he remembered that night. That sky. That tiny moment of stillness. What happened during those first few weeks of trying to get clean? Who betrayed him when he needed them most? And what secret did he uncover that made him question everything, even his reason for surviving? You're not ready for that part yet. But it's coming. The rehab center wasn't what he imagined. No white walls or peaceful music. Just a room full of people trying to hold themselves together with trembling hands and shaky hope. He didn't speak for the first 2 days. Just listened. Watched. Tried to figure out if any of them were like him, or if he was beyond help. Most of the others had been there before. Some were angry. Some too quiet. A few cracked jokes to hide the fear in their eyes. And then there was Marcus, the guy who always sat in the corner, staring at the same spot on the floor. Nobody knew his full story, but something about him felt familiar. Like he had seen the same darkness. At night, the nightmares came back. Flashbacks. Faces he had hurt. Things he had done. One night, he woke up screaming. Everyone stared, but no one said anything. The counselor pulled him aside the next day. Asked him what he was running from. He laughed. Not because it was funny, but because he didn't know where to begin. How do you explain the kind of guilt that settles in your bones? The kind that whispers to you that you don't deserve peace? He started writing things down. Thoughts. Memories. Regrets. Pages and pages. At first, it was just for him. But then he shared one of them during group therapy. It was raw, uncomfortable. But something shifted. People leaned in. A few even cried. For the first time, he realized his pain could mean something. Could help someone else. But the more he shared, the more vulnerable he became, and the more fragile he felt. That's when the letter arrived. He didn't recognize the handwriting. But the moment he read the first line, he felt like the air had been knocked out of him. It was from someone he thought he'd lost forever. Someone whose life he had destroyed on one of his worst nights. The letter wasn't angry. It was quiet. Full of pain, yes, but also something unexpected, forgiveness. And yet, it only made things harder. Because now he had to face the one thing he'd buried deep, himself. What if he didn't deserve that forgiveness? What if they didn't know the whole truth? He folded the letter, tucked it away. But it stayed with him. Haunted him. Forced him to revisit the night that changed everything. The night he thought no one would ever find out about. A night that wasn't just a low point, but a turning point. Meanwhile, outside the rehab center, things were shifting. A reporter had reached out. Said she was working on a story about addiction recovery. Said his name had come up from a mutual contact. He wasn't sure who. She asked for an interview. Said it might help others. But the moment she mentioned the city he left behind, his hands began to shake. Because that city held secrets. Ones he had buried under shame and silence. And there was someone else. Someone who hadn't forgotten what happened. Someone watching from a distance, waiting for him to slip again. Not everyone believed in second chances. And some wounds, he was about to learn, don't stay buried forever. But the question is, when the past comes knocking, will he be strong enough to answer? Not yet. But that moment is coming. The email from the reporter sat unread in his inbox for 3 days. He hovered over it more than once, heart racing, hands sweating. He didn't know what scared him more, that she might uncover the truth, or that she already had. The rehab counselors told him sharing his story could be healing. But no one warned him what it would feel like to peel back the past in front of the world. Especially when some parts were still so raw, so unfinished. Still bleeding. He finally clicked it open on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that made everything feel heavier. Her tone was calm, respectful. She said she'd heard about his recent talks, his journaling, how others in the program had been moved. She wanted to highlight hope. Redemption. But tucked in the second paragraph was a name. One he hadn't heard in over 2 years. Ava. His breath caught. She was the secret he'd never spoken of. The reason he left town. The final push that sent him spiraling into the darkest part of himself. They were close once, inseparable, some would say. Until the night everything fell apart. Until he crossed the line that couldn't be undone. He hadn't hurt her physically, but emotionally, he'd burned everything. And when she walked away, he didn't stop her. Couldn't. Because he believed he no longer deserved her kindness. And now, her name was back. He reached out to Marcus that night, the quiet man from the corner of the rehab center who had slowly become a silent anchor for him. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it mattered. He told Marcus about Ava. The letter. The reporter. The fear. Marcus didn't say much. Just nodded and said, "The past always circles back. It's what you do now that decides whether it breaks you or sets you free." But freedom had never felt more distant. 2 days later, while walking back from a group meeting, he saw someone standing near the rehab center gates. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks. But then she turned. It was her. Ava. No warning. No message. Just there. She looked different. Older. Stronger. Her eyes didn't carry the warmth they once did, but they held something else. Resolve. Maybe curiosity. Maybe pain. They stood in silence for what felt like hours, the wind slicing through the space between them. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. She broke the silence. "I didn't come to hurt you. I came to see if you're finally ready to tell the truth." He felt like the ground shifted beneath him. But what truth did she mean? Was it the lie he told his family to cover his shame? The money he stole that night? Or the voicemail, one he had deleted, but not before listening to it over and over again, until her words seared into his soul? The truth wasn't one thing. It was everything. And now it was all coming back, faster than he could control. The next morning, the reporter showed up. Not alone. She had a folder in her hand. Inside were documents, photos, names. connections he thought were buried. There was something in her eyes, part sympathy, part warning. "You need to tell your side," she said quietly. "Because soon, someone else will." The clock was ticking. And as he stood there, trapped between what he had run from and what he had become, the weight of the next step pressed down on him like never before. What he says next will change everything. He stared at the folder in the reporter's hands, his throat dry, heartbeat pounding like a warning drum. His mind was racing. What could be inside? Photos? Police reports? Messages he thought were erased? He'd spent the last year trying to bury that version of himself, trying to rebuild something even remotely close to a future. But now, the past wasn't just circling back, it was kicking down the door. He opened the folder slowly, eyes scanning the first page. At first, he didn't recognize it. It looked like a case file. Then his stomach dropped. It was a missing persons report, dated the week he left town. And then came the photo. Liam. His old roommate. His best friend before everything went wrong. Liam had disappeared the same week he relapsed for the final time. Everyone thought Liam moved away after they fought. That's what he told himself too. But now the file in front of him said otherwise. No forwarding address. No calls. No records. Just vanished. And on the last page was something worse, a witness statement. A neighbor recalling seeing him and Liam shouting outside their apartment late at night. That night. The reporter watched him carefully. "No one's accusing you," she said. "But you were the last person seen with him. You understand what that looks like, right?" His hands trembled. "We fought, but I didn't." He stopped. The memory was a blur. That night had always been fuzzy. The drugs, the anger, the regret. Had he done something he didn't remember? Had something happened to Liam, and he just left? Suddenly, it wasn't just about addiction anymore. It wasn't just about redemption or Ava or forgiveness. It was something darker. A possible crime. A disappearance. And now, his name was being pulled into it. He left the meeting with the reporter in a daze, barely remembering how he got back to his room. That night, the nightmares were different. They weren't just memories, they were flashes. A shout. A push. The sound of something breaking. He woke up gasping, unsure if it was a dream or a buried truth clawing its way back. Marcus noticed the change immediately. "Something's wrong," he said. "You're walking like the world's about to fall on your head." He told Marcus everything. The file. Liam. The memory gaps. For the first time, Marcus didn't have something wise to say. Just silence. And then, "You need to find out what really happened. Before someone else decides that for you." The next day, he booked a bus ticket back to the city he swore he'd never return to. Because now, the story was no longer just about recovery, it was about survival. If the truth was as bad as it felt, everything he had built could come crashing down. The speeches, the progress, the second chances, gone. But deep inside, a question burned hotter than the fear. What if he really did something unforgivable? That question followed him all the way to the bus terminal, whispering over the roar of traffic, growing louder with every mile he traveled toward the city where everything began, and where it all might end. The city hadn't changed much, but he had. Everything felt smaller somehow, like the places that once swallowed him whole now stood quietly, waiting. He took a deep breath outside his old apartment building. The paint was still chipped, the same dog barked from a balcony 2 floors up, and that alley, where it all fell apart, still smelled of oil and old regrets. He stood there for a while, not ready to move, not sure what he would even find. He wasn't sure what he was looking for either. Closure? Evidence? Forgiveness? All he had was a name, Liam, and a blurred memory he no longer trusted. He walked the streets they used to hang out on, stopped by the liquor store where they'd once joked about becoming legends, and finally ended up at the community shelter where they used to volunteer before things got dark. He didn't expect anything there. But when he walked through the doors, a familiar voice called out from the back. "Look who decided to crawl out from the dead." He turned so fast it made his head spin. And there he was, Liam. Alive. Tired looking, older, rough around the edges, but alive. His knees nearly gave out. Liam stared at him with guarded eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost. I thought, they said, you disappeared." "I did." Liam walked over, arms folded. "From you." The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. The silence screamed. "You left after that fight," he whispered. "I thought maybe I hurt you." Liam shook his head. "You didn't touch me. But that night, I saw something in you. Something broken. I figured if I stayed, I'd get pulled down too. So I vanished. Needed to get clean. Needed to find myself again." The relief hit like a wave, then shame followed right behind it. "I've spent 2 years thinking I might have ruined everything." "You did ruin a lot," Liam said, not cruelly, just honestly. "But you didn't ruin me." They sat outside the shelter for hours, talking about everything, what happened after that night, the silent guilt, the sleepless years. Liam explained how he started over, how he kept tabs from a distance. And then came the twist. The reporter? She hadn't stumbled across Liam's name by accident. He had contacted her. He knew the story was being told and thought maybe it was time to bring it all out. "She was never trying to expose you," Liam said quietly. "She was trying to see if you were ready to finish the story." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Everything, the fear, the folder, the anxiety, it had all led back here. To the truth. Not of a crime, but of consequences. Of 2 lives pulled apart by addiction, and somehow finding their way back. He returned home with something unexpected: peace. He continued sharing his story, but this time, he included Liam. The fall, the fight, the silence. All of it. And audiences listened not because it was perfect, but because it was real. But just when it seemed like everything had finally come full circle, he got another letter, this time with no return address. Inside was a single line: "You helped one person. But there are hundreds more still waiting." And just like that, the story wasn't over. It was only beginning again. He sat alone at his desk that night, the letter still in his hand, its words repeating in his mind like an echo. "You helped one person. But there are hundreds more still waiting." It didn't come with any instructions. No name, no signature. Just that quiet challenge. And something about it felt right. Not like pressure, but purpose. He realized that all this time, even after the speeches and the healing, he'd still been focused on making peace with the past. But maybe now it was time to turn forward. To help others who were still stuck where he once was, lost, ashamed, afraid to speak. Over the next few months, he started something small. A support group, just a few people at first. Some were new to recovery, some had relapsed more times than they could count. They didn't need inspiration, they needed someone who understood. Someone who could sit with them through the hard days, the heavy days, and not flinch. He showed up every week. Not as a hero, but as someone who knew what it was like to feel forgotten. And slowly, something amazing happened. People started to change. Heal. Trust. He reached back out to Ava too, not to fix anything, but to say thank you. For showing up when she didn't have to. For giving him that moment of truth when he needed it most. Their story had ended long ago, but the respect they rebuilt was something new. Something better. Liam kept his distance mostly, but they spoke from time to time. Enough to know they were both still trying. Still walking their own version of the long road back. And that was enough. The reporter eventually published the article, Not a scandal, not a takedown, but a story of growth. It was honest, uncomfortable in places, but it touched people. Emails began to come in from strangers. Messages from parents, spouses, even teens. They didn't want advice. They just wanted to feel like they weren't alone. And that's what it had become about: connection. Turning pain into something useful. Telling the truth even when it hurt. Showing people that rock bottom didn't have to be the end. That addiction wasn't a life sentence. That healing, though messy, was possible. He knew he'd never be perfect. There were still days when the weight crept back in. But now, he didn't run from it. He met it with clarity. With the memory of that night on the bench. With the reminder of how far he'd come. From addiction to inspiration wasn't just a headline, it was a journey. A long, twisting one, filled with regret, forgiveness, and second chances. And though the story had found its ending, its message would continue. Through every person who found the courage to speak, to recover, to rise. And maybe one day, someone else will sit with their own letter in hand, wondering if they matter. And they'll know, without a doubt, that they do.